In this video, I'm going to be talking about rules and about how some people might be opposed to rules. I mean, there's this stereotype, particularly about teenagers. They say that how teenagers tend to be rebellious and resistant to authority and resistant to rules of all sorts. Which, that's far from the truth. From my own experience, I've known a lot of teenagers. It's far from the truth. But a lot of teenagers are sometimes rebellious for good causes. They want more freedom. They want to be able to do more. Maybe their parents might be too restrictive, or just society in general might be too restrictive towards teenagers. After all, teenagers do face restrictions that other people don't. They can't vote. They can't drink alcohol. I'm not a big fan of alcohol myself, but it's just something that teenagers aren't allowed to do. Teenagers, at least in the early teenage years, you can't drive. You can't get a CDL until you're 21, as a matter of fact. That's a commercial driver's license, which if you want to operate buses and trucks, those big machines, that's what you need the CDL for. So yeah, both society and the family, they tend to sometimes put restrictions on teenagers, which it's often unfair. And so teenagers who rebel against that and rebel against such authority, it's for a good cause. Now, a lot of people, particularly parents, they'll go around saying, well, there's always going to be rules, even for teenagers, even after they no longer live with their parents, even when they reach a certain age, 18, 21, whatever, that there's always going to be rules, that the parents themselves have rules they have to follow. That's what people who are against this about teenagers having more freedom and all that. They say that there's always going to be rules. Well, yes, that's true. There always will be rules. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how old you are. You could be a big CEO. You could be president of the United States, and there's still rules you're going to have to follow. It doesn't matter what. No matter what, there's always going to be rules. For instance, there's this rule that says you can't kill people. Doesn't matter if you've turned 18 or 21 or 25. It doesn't matter if you're the president. You're still going to have that rule. That rule that says that you can't kill people. We always will have that rule. And personally, I think that's a good thing. I think it's good to always have that specific rule that says you can't kill people. I think we're much better off having that rule than not having it, than if we didn't have it. So, as it is, it's good to have some rules. We need to have some rules. Rules that I'm against, however, are those rules that are there for my own good, for my own safety, for my own protection. I control my protection. I control how I'm protected. I choose what's for my own good. So the only rules that are for my own good that I respect or follow are those rules that I make myself. I make those rules for myself if they're there for my own good. For instance, there's this rule that says, in some states they say that if you ride a motorcycle you have to wear a helmet, and which I think is ridiculous. Now, speaking as somebody who does have a motorcycle license, I do have a license, I do sometimes ride motorcycles. Personally, I would never ride without a helmet. I always wear a helmet whenever I ride a motorcycle. Even if I'm in a certain place where it's not required by law, I'm still going to wear a helmet. I think that's a good idea. I recommend it to anybody else who rides motorcycles. I highly recommend to wear a helmet. In my opinion, it's much better to wear a helmet than not to if you're going to ride. However, if somebody else wants to ride a motorcycle without a helmet, as far as I'm concerned, that's their choice. It's there for their protection, but like I said, that's something that you have to have control over yourself. If somebody wants to take that risk of having their brains splattered out when they're riding a motorcycle without a helmet, well, that's their choice. I mean, that rule's ridiculous. Now, rules that say that you have to obey certain speed limits, that you can't run red lights, etc., those rules, they're not there for my specific protection. They're there for the protection of society as a whole. If I run a red light, why, of course, I'm endangering myself. If I get into a crash, I'm, of course, endangering myself. But I'm also, the main thing is that I'm endangering those other people who are crossing on the green light. They've got the green light, so they're going to be crossing the intersection. If I hit those people and injure or kill them, it's them that, I am endangering myself, but it's also, it's society in general that why we have that rule, for the safety of society in general, for the protection of society in general. That's why we have rules that say that you can't run red lights or that you have to obey certain speed limits, etc., etc. They're there for the protection of society as a whole. And I agree with that. I think that, yeah, it's good to have rules that are for the protection of society as a whole, to a certain point, but rules that are there for my own protection, I think are ridiculous, and I don't follow those kinds of rules. And that's the important thing about teenagers who want to, be rebellious and want more freedom. Maybe they don't want to be protected in certain ways. Maybe they want to choose what's best for them. Maybe they don't. Maybe they want to be in control of their own safety. Maybe they want to take responsibility for themselves, and they should. They're young adults. They're going to go out into the real world on their own pretty soon. They have to get used to it. And if you make a mistake, you take the consequences. So, rules that say that you can't ride a motorcycle without a helmet, or that you have to use a seatbelt when you drive, those are ridiculous. Even though I think those are good ideas to wear a helmet and to use a seatbelt, but I think it's ridiculous to have rules that say you have to do that, and all those rules that parents make for their teenagers for their own protection, for their own safety, for their own good. Teenagers have to decide for themselves what's for their own good. Like, the parents say to their teenager, we don't want you dating, you might get burned, you might break your heart. It's the teenager's heart that gets broken. It's the teenager themselves that gets burned. It's not like their parents' heart's going to get broken or their parents are going to get burned. I know what it's like. I've been burned myself. I've been hurt really badly in relationships. But that's how I learn. And if a teenager wants to take that chance of having their heart broken, that's their choice. If a teenager wants to take that chance of getting burned, that's their choice, not their parents'. They're only doing it to themselves. They have to choose what's for their own good. So to say, oh, your parents don't want you dating because you might break your heart, that is just plain stupid. Anybody who agrees with that is just plain stupid. Why can't you just learn to take responsibility for yourself? If you want to take the risk of breaking your heart, that's your choice. It's a teenager's choice. I made that choice myself, and yeah, I have gotten burned, but I learned from that. I wouldn't trade that. I mean, you have to choose for yourself what's best for yourself. It's nobody else's business to make those choices for you. You got to be independent and you got to be free. So yes, rules are good when they're there for the good of society as a whole. Like rules that say you can't commit murder or that you can't run red lights. Those are good rules because they're there for the society as a whole. Rules that are there for my own good, I make those rules myself, and that's how it should be with everybody, and that's how it should be in this world in general. Especially with teenagers. Teenagers, you have to learn to be independent, and you got to learn how to take the consequences, make your own mistakes, and you have to choose what's best for you. Nobody can choose what's best for you except for you, and that's just the way it is. You make your own choices, you choose what's best for you. Be free, be grown up, make the best of yourself.